Ambassador Zethkri looked at the blue planet through the viewing port of his diplomatic ship. Earth hung in space like a precious jewel, covered in white clouds and vast oceans. This was his 847th first contact mission, and he felt confident about the outcome. Every species had welcomed the Galactic Council eventually. Some took longer than others, but they all came around when they saw the benefits. The diplomatic ship Harmony of Stars was the Council's finest vessel, designed to impress new species. Its golden hull gleamed in the sunlight, and its size dwarfed any primitive spacecraft the humans might have built. Advanced technology hummed throughout the ship, ready to demonstrate the Council's peaceful intentions and superior capabilities. Zethkri's team had studied the humans for months from a distance. They were a young species, barely out of their home planet. Their technology was crude but showed promise. Most importantly, they had nuclear weapons, which meant they understood the concept of mutual destruction. This usually made species more willing to negotiate rather than fight. "Begin the standard greeting protocol," Zethkri ordered his communications officer, a tall being with blue skin and large eyes. The officer's name was unpronounceable to most species, so everyone called him Blue. Blue activated the universal translator and began broadcasting on all human communication frequencies. The message was simple and had worked for thousands of years. "Greetings, people of Earth. We are representatives of the Galactic Council, a peaceful organization of civilized worlds. We come in friendship to offer you membership in our great community. Please respond so we may begin diplomatic talks." The response came faster than expected. Within an hour, signals poured in from all over Earth. But something was wrong. Instead of wonder or curiosity, the humans sounded angry. "This is the United Nations Security Council," came the first official response. "We demand that you identify yourselves and state your intentions immediately. Any attempt to enter our atmosphere or land on our planet will be considered an act of war." Zethkri blinked his four eyes in confusion. War? They were offering friendship and membership in the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. Why were the humans talking about war? More messages followed from different human nations. The Americans said they would shoot down any alien vessel that came too close. The Russians moved their nuclear submarines into position. The Chinese began evacuating their major cities. Even smaller nations started preparing for battle. "Sir," Blue said nervously, "they're not just talking. Look at this." The main screen showed Earth's orbital space. Human space stations and satellites were moving into new positions. Military ships that had been hidden were suddenly visible. The humans were actually preparing to fight them. Dr. Vexara, the team's chief xenopsychologist, studied the data with growing concern. She was a small gray creature with a large brain and centuries of experience understanding alien minds. "This makes no sense," she muttered. "Every species we've encountered shows some level of curiosity about our technology. Even the most aggressive ones want to learn before they fight." "Maybe they didn't understand our message," suggested Blue. "Should we try again with simpler language?" Zethkri nodded. "Send another transmission. Use their most basic communication methods. Make it clear, we mean no harm." The second message was broadcast on every human radio and television station simultaneously. "People of Earth, we are your friends from the stars. We do not wish to hurt you. We want to help you join the family of peaceful worlds. Please do not be afraid." The human response was even stronger this time. Every nation on Earth issued the same basic message. "Leave our solar system immediately, or we will defend ourselves with all available force." What happened next shocked the diplomatic team. Human military forces didn't just prepare for defense. They began actively targeting the Council ship with primitive but surprisingly effective sensor arrays. Worse, they started launching objects into space at an incredible rate. "Sir," the ship's security officer reported, "they're building some kind of weapons platform. Multiple platforms. And they're doing it fast." Zethkri watched in amazement as humans worked around the clock to construct orbital defense systems. They weren't using plans or careful engineering. They were improvising, building weapons out of whatever they had available. It was crude and inefficient, but it was happening at a speed that defied logic. Dr. Vexara pulled up psychological profiles from their database. Sir, I think we have a serious problem. Look at this data about human development. The information was disturbing. Unlike other species that had developed civilization through cooperation and sharing resources, humans had spent their entire history fighting each other. Their technological advances had come primarily through military competition. Their greatest achievements had been driven by the need to defeat other humans. They're not afraid of us, Dr. Vexara explained. They're treating us like they would treat any other threat. In their minds, we're just another enemy to be defeated. But that's impossible, Zethkri protested. No intelligent species thinks that way. War is wasteful and destructive. Cooperation is always more efficient. Not for humans, apparently, the doctor replied. Their entire culture is built around competition and conflict. They see our offer of membership as a demand for surrender. The situation got worse over the following days. Humans began reverse engineering the Council's technology with frightening speed. They had somehow analyzed the diplomatic ship's sensors and communication systems just from observing them. Within a week, they had built crude copies of Council technology and were improving them rapidly. But their improvements weren't aimed at efficiency or peace. Every human modification made the technology more dangerous. They turned communication devices into jamming systems. They modified peaceful sensors into targeting systems for weapons. Everything they touched became a tool for war. Sir, Blue reported with fear in his voice. They're not just defending anymore. 3 human vessels just launched from Earth, and they're heading straight for us. Zethkri couldn't believe it. The humans were actually attacking. Their ships were tiny compared to the harmony of stars, and their weapons were primitive. But they were coming anyway, apparently willing to die rather than accept Council membership. Open a channel, Zethkri ordered. Maybe we can still reason with them. The human response came from the lead attacking ship, a female voice, calm and determined. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. You have ignored our warnings and remained in our space. This is your final chance to leave peacefully. Captain Chen, Zethkri replied, you don't understand. We're offering your species wonders beyond imagination, technology that could solve all your problems, peace and prosperity for all humanity. We don't want your peace, Captain Chen answered. We want you gone. The human ships opened fire. Their weapons were crude nuclear missiles and kinetic projectiles, nothing that could seriously damage a Council vessel. But the psychological impact was enormous. For the first time in Zethkri's long career, a species was shooting at him. Doctor. Vexara was studying the attack patterns with growing horror. Sir, look at their tactics. They're not trying to disable us or capture our technology. They're trying to destroy us completely. Indeed, the humans weren't following any civilized rules of engagement. They weren't demanding surrender or offering terms. They were simply trying to kill everyone on the Council ship. It was barbaric, primitive, and absolutely terrifying. Sir, the security officer called out. More human ships are launching, dozens of them. And they're all armed with nuclear weapons. Zethkri made a decision that he had never had to make in 847 previous missions. Retreat to safe distance. We need to contact the Council immediately. As the harmony of stars moved away from Earth, Zethkri composed his report with shaking hands. For the first time in galactic history, a species had rejected Council membership with violence. And worse, they seemed to actually mean it. The humans weren't afraid of superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They were willing to fight and die rather than submit to any outside authority. It was a completely alien way of thinking that challenged everything the Council understood about intelligent life. As Earth grew smaller in the viewing port, Zethkri realized that this first contact mission had failed in ways he couldn't have imagined. The humans hadn't just said no to the Council's offer. They had declared war on the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, and somehow, that didn't seem to frighten them at all. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been going for 3 days straight. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in the great assembly hall, their voices raised in confusion and fear. Never before had the Council faced such a Crisis Supreme Chancellor. Mordun called for order with his ceremonial staff. The ancient being had seen the council through many challenges, but nothing like this. His 6 arms gestured for silence as the assembly hall slowly quieted down. Fellow beings, Mordun began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. We face an unprecedented situation. For the first time in our recorded history, a species has not only rejected membership in our council, but has done so with violence. A ripple of concerned murmurs spread through the assembly. The Altarian representative stood up, his blue crystalline body catching the light. Honored Chancellor, surely this is a misunderstanding. No intelligent species would willingly choose conflict over the benefits we offer. Ambassador Zethkri, still shaken from his encounter with the humans, rose from his seat. With respect, Representative Krillnox, I assure you there was no misunderstanding. The humans were very clear in their intentions. They want nothing to do with the Council, and they're prepared to fight to defend their isolation. The Valdorian delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a shimmering field, spoke next. Perhaps their rejection stems from fear of the unknown. Many primitive species react with hostility when first contacted. Time and patience usually solve such problems. Dr. Vexara, who had accompanied Zethkri to the council chambers, stepped forward. Honored delegates, I've spent months studying human psychology and behavior. This isn't fear or misunderstanding. Humans are fundamentally different from any species we've encountered. She activated a holographic display showing Earth and its surrounding space. The image revealed the rapid militarization that had taken place since first contact. Human space platforms bristled with weapons. Ships patrolled the outer edges of their solar system. The entire species had mobilized for war. Look at what they've accomplished in just weeks, Dr. Vexara continued. They've reverse-engineered our technology and improved it for military purposes. Their rate of innovation is beyond anything in our databases. The Keeper of Records, an ancient machine intelligence, processed the data instantly. Confirmed. Human technological advancement rate exceeds all known parameters. However, their improvements focus exclusively on destructive applications rather than beneficial ones. A young delegate from the Centauran Collective raised her hand. Dr. Vexara, what makes humans so different? Why do they choose violence over cooperation? The xenopsychologist brought up new images showing human history. Battles, wars, conflicts spanning thousands of years. Humans evolved on what we would classify as a death world. Their planet is hostile to life, filled with dangerous predators and natural disasters. But instead of developing cooperation like most species, they became predators themselves. The images showed human cities built on the ruins of older settlements destroyed by war. Technologies developed for killing other humans. Art and literature that celebrated battle and conquest. It was unlike anything in the Council's experience. They don't fight for resources or territory like other species, Dr. Vexara explained. They fight because fighting is what they do. It's how they solve problems, how they advance their technology, how they define themselves. War isn't something that happens to humans. War is what humans are. The assembly fell silent as the implications sank in. The Aquatic Union representative, speaking through a translation device from his water tank, asked the question everyone was thinking. What do we do about them? General Thanecore of the Council Defense Force stood up. The massive insectoid being had not spoken in combat for over 2 centuries, but he remembered the old ways. The solution is obvious. If they choose war, we give them war. A small show of force should convince them to reconsider. Many delegates nodded in agreement. The Council's military might was legendary. No single world could stand against the combined fleets of hundreds of civilizations. A brief demonstration would surely bring the humans to their senses. But Dr. Vexara shook her head. General, I don't think you understand. Humans don't surrender when faced with superior force. They fight harder. Their entire history shows this pattern. The greater the threat, the more extreme their response becomes. She brought up more historical data. Humans fighting against impossible odds. Small nations resisting massive empires. Individuals choosing death over submission. Over and over the pattern repeated. Furthermore, she continued, they're not just preparing for defense. Our surveillance shows human expeditionary forces being assembled. They're planning to attack us. Shocked gasps filled the assembly hall. The idea that a primitive species would attack the council was absurd. It was like an ant declaring war on a giant. General Thanecore laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Let them come. Our shields can deflect their primitive weapons. Our sensors will detect them long before they arrive. It will be a short war, but the Council's intelligence reports painted a different picture. Human activities in their solar system had become increasingly concerning. They weren't just building more weapons. They were building different kinds of weapons. The humans had taken Council technology and twisted it into forms that made no sense to civilized minds. They had turned peaceful cargo containers into kinetic bombardment weapons. They had modified their own nuclear arsenal with alien technology, creating bombs that could crack planets. Most disturbing of all, they had built weapons designed to spread fear and terror rather than simply destroy targets. Their strategy doesn't follow any logical pattern, reported the Council's military analysts. They're not trying to defeat our forces in traditional combat. They're trying to make us too afraid to fight. The ethereal collective's representative, a being of living light, flickered with confusion. That makes no sense. Fear is counterproductive in warfare. Efficient destruction is preferable to psychological manipulation. Not to humans, Dr. Vexara replied. They understand that defeating an enemy's will to fight is more effective than destroying their ability to fight. It's a concept they call terror warfare. The reports from the edge of human space were becoming more troubling by the day. Human ships had begun appearing at the boundaries of Council territory, not attacking but watching, observing, learning. Every Council vessel that passed through the area was scanned and analyzed by human sensors. Worse, the humans had begun broadcasting messages on Council communication frequencies, not threats or demands, but something far more unsettling. Recruitment messages. They were trying to turn Council species against each other by offering better deals than the Council provided. People of the Rigel system, one intercepted message, began. Why do you let the Council control your trade routes? Join us and you can sell your goods for twice the price. We don't take taxes or demand tribute. We only ask that you remain neutral when the war begins. Several border worlds had already begun responding to these messages, not openly rebelling against the Council, but quietly establishing communication with human representatives. The unity that had held the galaxy together for millennia was beginning to crack. Supreme Chancellor Mordoon reviewed the reports with growing alarm. How many worlds are considering human offers? At least 40 that we know of, came the reply. Possibly more. The humans are being very careful about which systems they contact. They're targeting worlds that have complained about Council policies in the past. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. The humans weren't trying to defeat the Council militarily. They were trying to break it apart politically. They understood that the Council's strength came from unity, so they were attacking that unity directly. This is intolerable, General Thanecore declared. We cannot allow primitives to undermine our authority. I request permission to assemble the Grand Fleet and end this threat permanently. Many delegates agreed. The Council's patience had limits, and the humans had crossed every line. It was time to show them the price of defying galactic civilization. But as the vote was called, Dr. Vexara made one final observation that chilled everyone present. Honored delegates, before you decide on war, consider this. Everything the humans have done so far has been without leaving their home system. They've accomplished all of this while staying on the defensive. What do you think they'll do when they decide to attack? The vote was postponed while the Council considered this sobering thought. The humans had managed to threaten the stability of galactic civilization without firing a shot outside their own territory. What would happen when they finally decided to take the offensive? As the assembly adjourned, one truth became clear to everyone present. The galaxy would never be the same again. The humans had changed everything just by saying no, and somehow that was only the beginning. The Grand Fleet of the Galactic Council was the most magnificent sight in the known galaxy. 10,000 ships from hundreds of worlds, each one a masterpiece of technology and engineering. The fleet had not assembled for war in over 1,000 years, but now it gathered at the edge of human space like a steel storm ready to break. Admiral Veltar stood on the bridge of the flagship Unity's Promise, watching the final preparations. She was a veteran of the last great conflict, though that had been more of a police action than a real war. The Zellan rebellion had ended quickly when the rebels saw the futility of fighting the entire galaxy. "All ships report ready, Admiral," her communications officer announced. The young Centauran had never seen combat like most of the fleet. Peace had reigned so long that war had become almost mythical. "Very well," Admiral Veltar replied. "Begin the advance. Standard formation. We'll give the humans one final chance to surrender before we demonstrate council power." The Grand Fleet moved toward Earth like a slow avalanche of metal and energy. Their sensors detected the primitive human defenses long before they came into weapons range. Orbital platforms, asteroid mining ships converted to weapons platforms, and a few dozen combat vessels that barely qualified as warships by council standards. "Admiral," the tactical officer reported, "human forces are moving to intercept. Their entire fleet is advancing on our position." Admiral Veltar studied the tactical display with amusement. The humans had perhaps 50 ships total, compared to the Council's 10,000. It wasn't even a fair fight. "Open a communication channel. Let's offer them one last chance to see reason." The main screen flickered to life, showing a human male in a military uniform. He looked tired but determined, with the kind of scars that came from real combat experience. "This is Admiral Marcus Stone of the Earth Defense Force. You are in violation of human space. Turn around now or face the consequences." Admiral Veltar almost laughed. "Admiral Stone, I am Admiral Veltar of the Galactic Council Grand Fleet. You face the combined might of over 400 civilized worlds. Surely, you can see that resistance is futile. Surrender now and your people will be treated with mercy." Admiral Stone's expression didn't change. "Admiral Veltar, you have exactly 1 minute to begin retreat procedures before we open fire." "Admiral," Veltar said with forced patience, "you have 50 ships. We have 10,000. Your weapons are primitive nuclear devices. Our shields can withstand the destruction of stars. Please don't force us to demonstrate why cooperation is preferable to conflict." 45 seconds, Stone replied calmly. Admiral Veltar looked around her bridge in amazement. The human was serious. He actually intended to fight impossible, odds with no chance of victory. It was either the bravest or most foolish thing she had ever witnessed. "Admiral Stone," she tried one more time, "your species has potential. Don't throw away human lives for pride. Accept council membership, and your people will have access to wonders beyond imagination." 30 seconds, Stone said. Then he did. Something that shocked everyone on the council bridge. He smiled. "Admiral, you still don't understand. We're not fighting to win. We're fighting to make sure you remember what happens when you threaten humans." The communication cut off. Admiral Veltar stared at the blank screen, trying to process what she had just heard. Fighting to be remembered? What kind of strategy was that? "Admiral," her tactical officer called out urgently, "the human ships are accelerating directly toward our formation. They're not even trying to maintain formation or coordinate their attack." Admiral Veltar watched in fascination as the human vessels charged straight at the Grand Fleet. No fancy maneuvers, no clever tactics, just a direct assault against overwhelming odds. It was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. "All ships prepare for combat," she ordered. "Use minimum force. Try to disable rather than destroy. We want prisoners to question about human psychology." The first human ship to reach the Grand Fleet was a converted mining vessel bristling with improvised weapons. It ignored the warning shots from council vessels and rammed straight into a Valdorian cruiser. The explosion was visible across the entire battlefield. "What are they doing?" the tactical officer shouted. "That was a suicide run. They destroyed their own ship." More human vessels followed the same pattern. Instead of trying to fight from a distance like civilized beings, they charged into close combat, where their primitive weapons could do the most damage. They used their ships like guided missiles, ramming council vessels and detonating nuclear weapons at point-blank range. Admiral Veltar watched in growing horror as human ship after human ship sacrificed itself to destroy single council vessels. The mathematics were insane. The humans were trading one ship for one even though they were outnumbered 200 to 1. "Admiral," her communications officer reported with fear in his voice. "We're receiving reports from across the fleet. The humans aren't just attacking ships. They're targeting bridges, command centers, and reactor cores specifically. They're trying to kill as many officers as possible with each attack." The human strategy became clear with terrifying simplicity. They weren't trying to defeat the Grand Fleet. They were trying to make the cost of victory so high that no one would ever want to fight humans again. A converted human cargo ship broke through the Council formation and rammed the flagship's escort vessel. The explosion was close enough to shake the Unity's promise. Admiral Veltar felt something she hadn't experienced in centuries: fear. "All ships," she broadcast on the fleet frequency, "target human vessels at maximum range. Do not allow them to close distance. Use overwhelming firepower." But the humans had anticipated this response. As soon as the Council fleet began concentrating fire, the remaining human ships split up and attacked from multiple directions. They had hidden ships in the asteroid belt, camouflaged among the rocks. These vessels emerged and attacked the Council rearguard while the main force was focused forward. "Admiral," the tactical officer reported with barely controlled panic, "we've lost over 300 ships. The humans still have 12 vessels remaining." The mathematics were terrifying. 50 human ships had destroyed over 300 Council vessels, and they weren't finished yet. Each human attack grew more desperate and more effective. "Admiral." Stone's voice came over the communications system again, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Council fleet, this is your final warning. You have seen what 50 human ships can do to your Grand Fleet. We have thousands more ships in reserve and millions of humans ready to die defending our home. Leave now, or we will show you what total war really means." Admiral Veltar looked at her tactical display. The humans were telling the truth. Earth's orbital space showed hundreds of additional vessels under construction. The entire planet was mobilizing for a war of extermination. But it was Admiral Stone's next words that truly chilled her. "Admiral Veltar, you think this is about our survival? You're wrong. This is about teaching the galaxy what happens when you threaten humanity. Win or lose, every species in Council space will know that fighting humans means accepting massive casualties. Your own people will never forgive you for what this war will cost them." The last human ships launched their final attacks. They had loaded their vessels with every nuclear weapon Earth could produce and turned them into planet-killer bombs. The explosions lit up space like new stars. When the light faded, the human fleet was gone. But so were over 600 Council ships. The Grand Fleet had technically won, but at a cost that no one had imagined possible. Admiral Veltar stood in stunned silence on her damaged bridge. Around her, reports poured in from across the fleet. Thousands of dead, hundreds of ships destroyed or crippled. And for what? The humans were still there, still defiant, still preparing for the next battle. "Admiral," her communications officer whispered, "we're receiving a message from Earth. They're offering to negotiate a ceasefire." Admiral Veltar almost laughed at the absurdity. The humans had just lost their entire fleet, and now they wanted to negotiate. "Put it through." A new human face appeared on the screen. A woman with cold eyes and the bearing of someone used to making terrible decisions. "This is President Sarah Martinez of the United Earth Government. Admiral Veltar, I trust you've learned something about human resolve today. You've lost," Admiral Veltar said, though the words felt hollow. "Your fleet is destroyed. You have no defenses left." President Martinez smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Admiral Veltar had ever seen. "Admiral, what you just fought was our greeting. Our real fleet is still being built. Would you like to see what happens when humans stop being polite?" The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Veltar staring at reports of human industrial activity. Every factory on Earth was working around the clock. Every human was contributing to the war effort. They weren't just building ships. They were building weapons that violated every treaty of civilized warfare. The Grand Fleet had won the battle, but as they limped away from human space, everyone knew the truth. The humans had won something far more important. They had won fear. And for the first time in galactic history, the Council was afraid of a single species. The war had been raging for 3 years, and the galaxy was burning. What started as a simple police action to bring humanity into line had become the most devastating conflict in recorded history. The Galactic Council's perfectly ordered civilization was crumbling under the weight of human warfare. Supreme Chancellor Mordun sat in his private chambers, reviewing reports that grew worse each day. The latest intelligence briefings painted a picture of chaos that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. 37 Council worlds had fallen to human forces. 12 more had declared neutrality rather than face human attack. The unthinkable was happening. The Council was losing. A soft chime announced the arrival of his aide, a nervous young being from the Centauran Collective. "Your Excellence, the Military Council is ready for your review." Mordun nodded wearily. These meetings had become exercises in damage control rather than strategic planning. "Send them in." General Thanecore entered first, his massive insectoid form showing signs of wear that hadn't been there before the war began. Behind him came Admiral Veltar, the survivor of humanity's first major victory. Her crystalline features had lost their former confidence. "Report," Mordun said simply. General Thanecore activated a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. Red markers indicated human-controlled systems, yellow showed neutral or contested areas, and blue represented remaining Council territory. The amount of red was shocking. "The humans have established forward bases in 17 systems," Thanecore began. "Their expansion isn't following any logical pattern. They're not taking resource-rich worlds or strategically important systems. They're targeting worlds that will cause maximum psychological impact." Admiral Veltar stepped forward. "Chancellor, the humans aren't fighting a normal war. They're not trying to conquer territory or capture resources. They're trying to break our will to fight." The hologram zoomed in on the Altair system, which had fallen to human forces just 2 weeks ago. The once proud crystal cities of the Altarians lay in ruins, but not from bombardment. The humans had landed ground forces and destroyed the cities in close combat, ensuring maximum casualties among both sides. They could have simply bombed the cities from orbit, Admiral Veltar explained. It would have been easier and safer. Instead, they chose the most costly method possible, both for us and for them. They wanted the Altarians to see human soldiers dying to kill them. They wanted to make it personal. The strategy was working with terrifying effectiveness. Species that had never known fear were now paralyzed by it. The mere threat of human attack was enough to make entire worlds consider surrender. "What's our casualty count?" Mordun asked, dreading the answer. "Over 15 million military personnel," Thanecore replied. "The humans have lost approximately 8 million, but their casualty rate is actually increasing as the war continues." This was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of human warfare. Normal species became more careful as conflicts dragged on, trying to preserve their remaining forces. Humans did the opposite. The longer the war continued, the more extreme their tactics became. Recent human attacks had abandoned any pretense of civilized warfare. They used biological weapons that targeted specific species. They deployed psychological warfare that drove entire populations insane. Most horrifying of all, they had begun using planet-killing weapons without regard for their own casualties. The Rigel incident, Admiral Veltar reported with obvious reluctance, resulted in the complete destruction of the system's 4th planet. 17 billion Rigelians died instantly, but the humans lost over 2 million of their own people in the attack. They had ground forces on the planet when they triggered the weapon. The silence that followed was deafening. The idea of deliberately killing your own soldiers to ensure enemy destruction was beyond the comprehension of civilized minds. Yet humans did it routinely, and their forces accepted such orders without question. "How is this possible?" Mordun asked. How can an entire species think like this? Dr. Vexara, who had been monitoring human psychology throughout the war, provided the answer. Excellence, we've been approaching this wrong from the beginning. We keep trying to understand humans through our own cultural lens, but they're fundamentally different. She activated new displays showing human communications intercepted during battles, soldiers laughing as they charged into certain death, commanders ordering attacks that would kill their own people, civilians volunteering for suicide missions against impossible odds. They don't see death as failure, Dr. Vexara explained. To humans, dying while killing enemies is success. They measure victory not by territory captured or resources gained, but by the cost they inflict on their opponents. The intercepted communications were disturbing. Human soldiers didn't discuss survival or going home. They talked about taking as many of them with us as possible, and making sure they remember us. It was the mentality of a species that had evolved specifically for warfare. Furthermore, the doctor continued, their industrial capacity is increasing during the war, not decreasing. Normal species exhaust their resources fighting. Humans are actually becoming stronger. This was true. Human worlds weren't just producing weapons. They were producing new kinds of weapons that Council scientists hadn't thought possible. Humanity's rate of innovation during wartime was beyond anything in galactic history. The reports showed human research facilities working around the clock to develop new ways to kill Council species. They had created diseases that targeted specific alien biologies. They had built weapons that could destroy entire fleets with single shots. Most disturbing of all, they were building weapons designed to inflict maximum suffering rather than clean death. They're not trying to win efficiently, Admiral Veltar observed. They're trying to win memorably. The psychological impact was devastating Council morale. Species that had joined the Council for protection were questioning whether that protection still existed. Some worlds were quietly negotiating separate peace treaties with humanity. Others were simply abandoning their colonies rather than face human attack. What about our allies? Morden asked. How many worlds remain loyal? The answer was worse than he expected. 43 systems have declared neutrality, Thanacor reported. 18 have signed non-aggression pacts with humanity. 7 have actually joined the humans. The idea that Council species would join humanity was the ultimate betrayal. But the humans had made them offers the Council couldn't match. Complete autonomy in exchange for non-interference, profitable trade deals with no oversight, and most importantly, protection from human attack. The Aquatic Union made their decision yesterday, Admiral Veltar added quietly. They've agreed to provide the humans with intelligence about Council fleet movements in exchange for guaranteed safety. Morden felt the weight of millennia of civilization crashing down around him. The Galactic Council had brought peace and prosperity to hundreds of worlds, but now those same worlds were abandoning them for the protection of barbarians. What do the humans want? He asked desperately. There must be something they'll accept to end this war. Dr. Vexara consulted her notes. We've intercepted several human communications about their war goals. They're remarkably consistent. Complete recognition of human independence, withdrawal of all Council forces from their territory, and reparations for the cost of the war. That's all? Morden couldn't believe it. They're not demanding tribute or territory? No, Excellence. They just want to be left alone. But they're willing to destroy galactic civilization to ensure it. The final piece of intelligence was perhaps the most chilling. Human expeditionary forces weren't just attacking Council worlds. They were establishing permanent bases throughout the galaxy, not for conquest, but for deterrence. They were building a network of military positions that could strike any Council world within days. They're not trying to rule us, Admiral Veltar realized. They're trying to make sure we can never threaten them again. The human strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. They couldn't defeat the entire galaxy in conventional warfare, so they were making conventional warfare too costly to contemplate. Every Council victory came at such a high price that future wars would be unthinkable. Excellence, Dr. Vexara said quietly. I believe the humans have already won. Not militarily, but psychologically. They've made us afraid of them. And fear is the most powerful weapon in the galaxy. As if to emphasize her point, reports arrived of 3 more council worlds requesting permission to negotiate with humanity. The cascade was accelerating. Soon the council would have no choice but to accept human terms or face the complete collapse of galactic civilization. Morden looked out at the stars visible through his chamber windows. Each light represented worlds that had once looked to the Council for leadership and protection. Now those same worlds were learning to fear a species that had never left its home system until forced to do so. The humans had taught the galaxy a lesson that would never be forgotten. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who has nothing left to lose. The Treaty of Sol was signed 5 years after the first human ship had been destroyed, in what history would remember as the shortest and most decisive war in galactic history. The ceremony took place aboard a human space station in Earth's orbit, a location chosen deliberately to remind everyone who had dictated the terms. Supreme Chancellor Morden sat across the negotiation table from President Martinez, the same human leader who had warned Admiral Veltar years ago. The woman had aged during the war, but her eyes still held the same cold determination that had made the galaxy tremble. "The terms are simple," President Martinez said, reading from a document that had taken months to negotiate. "Complete withdrawal of all Galactic Council forces from human space. Recognition of human independence and sovereignty over any territory we choose to claim. And most importantly, establishment of Earth as the final arbiter of interspecies conflicts." Morden wanted to object to the last point, but he no longer had the power to do so. The Council's authority had evaporated during the war. Species that had once looked to the Council for leadership now looked to humanity for protection. "Agreed," he said quietly. "But I must ask, what are your intentions for the galaxy? Will you attempt to rule us directly?" President Martinez actually smiled at the question. "Chancellor, we never wanted to rule anyone. We just wanted to be left alone. But since that's apparently impossible, we'll settle for being the ones everyone is afraid to bother." The truth of her statement was evident throughout the galaxy. Humanity had established military bases in over 100 systems, not as conquest, but as deterrence. Human fleets patrolled the major trade routes, not collecting taxes, but ensuring that no species grew powerful enough to threaten others. The new galactic order was strange, but effective. Conflicts between species were resolved not through council diplomacy, but through human arbitration. And human arbitration was remarkably simple. Both sides presented their cases, humans made a decision, and everyone accepted it because the alternative was facing human displeasure. "What about the council worlds that collaborated with you during the war?" Morden asked. "What becomes of them?" "They're under human protection now," Martinez replied. "The Aquatic Union, the Centauran Collective, the Rigel Commonwealth, and 47 other systems have signed mutual defense treaties with Earth. Anyone who attacks them attacks us." This was the most dramatic change in galactic politics. Species that had been enemies for centuries were now forced to coexist peacefully because humanity guaranteed the safety of both sides. The humans didn't care about ancient grudges or territorial disputes. They cared about stability and being left alone to develop their own worlds. And what of species that refused to accept human authority? Morden had to ask, though he already knew the answer. President Martinez's expression didn't change. "There aren't any. The Valdorian Empire tried to rebuild their fleet last year. We demonstrated what happens to species that threaten the peace. The wreckage of their homeworld is still glowing. The Valdorian incident had shocked the galaxy. When the proud energy beings had attempted to challenge human authority, humanity's response had been swift and absolute, not just military defeat but complete annihilation. An entire species wiped out in a matter of hours as a lesson to others." "That seems excessive," Morden ventured. "It was meant to be," Martinez replied calmly. "We're not interested in fighting, or showing mercy to species that threaten galactic stability. We're interested in making sure that threats don't arise in the first place." The human approach to peacekeeping was brutal, but effective. Instead of maintaining large standing armies to deter conflict, they simply made the cost of aggression so high that no rational species would consider it. The threat of human retaliation was more effective than any number of peacekeeping forces. Dr. Vexara, who had remained as the Council's chief xenopsychologist, presented her final report on human psychology. Madam President, our studies indicate that human society has changed significantly since the war began. How do you maintain unity among your people? President Martinez considered the question carefully. Doctor, the war taught us something important. For thousands of years, humans fought each other because we had no external threats. Now we do. Every human knows that the galaxy sees us as dangerous barbarians who can't be reasoned with. That external pressure has united us in ways that internal politics never could. It was true. Human society had transformed during the war from a collection of competing nations into a single unified species focused on external defense. They still had internal disagreements, but those were settled quickly so they could present a united front to the galaxy. What's most interesting, Dr. Vexara noted, is that humans have become more peaceful since being labeled as violent. Your crime rates have dropped, your internal conflicts have decreased, and your technological development has shifted toward beneficial rather than military applications. President Martinez nodded. When everyone outside your species thinks you're monsters, you have two choices. Become the monster they expect, or prove them wrong through your actions. We chose to prove them wrong while keeping the reputation of being monsters. It's the best of both worlds. This was perhaps humanity's greatest achievement. They had managed to maintain their fearsome reputation while actually becoming a stabilizing force in the galaxy. Species that had warred for millennia were now at peace because humanity guaranteed that peace through the implicit threat of overwhelming retaliation. Ambassador Zethkri, whose failed first contact mission had started the entire conflict, raised a question that had puzzled diplomats throughout the war. President Martinez, why didn't humans simply accept council membership initially? You could have achieved the same results through negotiation. President Martinez looked at the ambassador with something approaching pity. Ambassador, your first contact team arrived at Earth and demanded our submission. You offered us membership in your organization under your terms, following your rules subject to your authority. Did it ever occur to you to ask what we wanted? The question hung in the air like an accusation. The Council had spent thousands of years assuming that all intelligent species would want the same things they wanted: order, stability, and collective decision-making. They had never considered that some species might prefer independence even at the cost of isolation. Furthermore, Martinez continued, your entire diplomatic approach was based on the assumption that we would be grateful for your attention. You never considered that we might see your arrival as a threat rather than an opportunity. Dr. Vexara made notes rapidly. So the war could have been avoided if the Council had approached humanity differently. Possibly, Martinez replied, but honestly, probably not. Humans don't trust easily, and we don't like being told what to do by strangers. Even if your diplomats had been perfect, we probably would have rejected Council membership anyway. Then, why did you agree to become arbiters of galactic disputes? Morden asked. Isn't that the same responsibility you rejected? President Martinez smiled again. Chancellor, there's a difference between joining someone else's organization and having people come to you for help. We're not members of the Council. We're not subject to galactic law. We're simply the species that everyone is afraid to argue with. That makes us excellent judges. The new system was already proving effective. Trade disputes that might have led to wars were settled in human courts within days. Territorial conflicts were resolved by human arbitrators who cared nothing for historical claims or cultural significance. The humans made decisions based on practical considerations and enforced them through the simple threat of their displeasure. As the treaty signing concluded, Morden reflected on how completely the galaxy had changed. The Council still existed, but as an administrative body rather than a governing authority. Real power now rested with humanity, a species that had never wanted power, but had been forced to accept it. One final question, Morden said as the documents were sealed. What happens when other species develop technology that can challenge human military superiority? President Martinez stood and gathered her papers. Chancellor, we've thought about that possibility extensively. Our response is simple. We'll make sure that never happens. Any species that develops weapons capable of threatening human interests will find their homeworld relocated to the nearest star. The casual way she delivered the threat was more chilling than any dramatic declaration could have been. Humanity had become the galaxy's ultimate authority not through conquest, but through the simple understanding that challenging them meant extinction. As the human delegation departed, leaving the council representatives alone, Morden considered the irony of their situation. They had tried to force a primitive species to join their peaceful civilization, and instead that species had forced them to accept a more peaceful civilization than they had ever imagined. The galaxy was now more stable than it had been in millennia, not because of diplomacy or mutual understanding, but because everyone was too afraid of humanity to start conflicts. It wasn't the peace the council had envisioned, but it was effective. And perhaps most importantly, the humans seemed content with their role as the galaxy's enforcers.